Well, I think we'll get going and let people join us slowly as they come in. So, hello and welcome everyone. This is the final session of the Times Like These Voluntary Sector and Volunteering Research Conference. My name is Ellis Paine. I'm co-chair of the Voluntary Sector Studies Network and research fellow at the University of Birmingham. And I'm joined today by Veronique Yockham from NCVO, Ali Boddy from the University of Kent, and John Dean from Sheffield Hallam University. This session is going to be a more informal session from the previous one. So we've all got a drink in our hands, and we hope that some of you have in the audience. We very much wish that we were there sharing the beers with you in the same room, but we can share them kind of remotely. And the purpose of this session is really to launch two fantastic new books by John and Ali, and we'll come to talk about those in a moment. But before we get on to the main event, to the book launch, we just wanted to use the opportunity as the last session from a two-day conference, just to share a couple of words of thanks and kind of reflections on the last 2 days. So I just personally wanted to kind of thank everyone who's been involved in the putting on of the conference over the last 2 days. Thank you to all the speakers who have taken part. I'm sure that you'll all agree that we've had some absolutely fantastic contributions, really engaging discussions, lots of insightful sets of findings from the different research projects that have been taking place, all sorts of different perspectives that have been shared and kind of things to kind of really make us think about. So thank you to all the speakers who have taken part, but also thank you to all the attendees, to people who have joined the sessions and who've contributed so actively through the discussions, through the chat function and through the Q&A. We weren't quite sure how well it would work. This is our first time VSN and NCVO together, kind of running an online conference, particularly on this scale. So it was new to us, and we weren't quite sure how it would work with everyone joining in and kind of contributing to the discussions, but I think it's worked really well. Again, it's not quite the same as if you were here in person and we could see everyone and everyone could kind of ask questions directly, but the chat function's been really engaging and engaged, as has the Q&A. So thank you all very much for that and for making them such good sessions. And particular thanks to our partner organisations in this, to NCVO, who has worked with VSSN over the past 20 odd years to organise the conference. We're really grateful for your ongoing kind of work with us on that. So thank you very much to Veronique in particular from NCVO, but the NCVO team as a whole. And thanks also to BVSC, who have partnered with us this year. We partnered with BVSC when the original plan was to be in Birmingham. It's a kind of a thought about how we can proceed with the annual conferences in the future in terms of partnering with local CVSs, depending on the location which we're having the conference. So this was our first year of doing that, and of course we're not actually in Birmingham, but absolutely great that BVSC was still kind of up for working with us on it on an online basis, and hopefully we will be in Birmingham next year, and hopefully that kind of relationship will continue. And then thanks also to everyone who's been involved in the organising team. A particular thanks to John Dean, who's with us, who has done an absolutely fantastic job of getting Zoom up and running and answering all the last minute queries that have come in and sending everyone in the right direction for each of the sessions. I mean, touch wood, it's a little bit too early to speak, but I'm amazed about how smoothly it has all gone on that front. So thank you, John. But also thanks to Carolyn, to Veronique, to Sophie, to Chris, and to Jane, and everyone who has worked together on the conference organising team. It has felt like a great team to be part of. So thank you very much for all the work.
And thank you, Angela. We couldn't have, obviously, we couldn't have done it without you. Don't forget yourself.
Thank you, John. Thank you. For those of you who don't know, this is my little bit of a shameless plug, which I'm always absolutely rubbish at doing, so apologies for this. But for those of you who don't know, VSSN, Voluntary Sector Studies Network, is a membership body. We bring together people who have an interest in research on voluntary action, voluntary sector, volunteering, civil society more broadly. And it is people who've got an interest in research, whether they're from academia, from policy, from practice. And if you're not already part of the network, I do encourage you to kind of consider joining. if you don't want to become a full member, do consider joining up to the discussion list. It's a kind of active list where you can find out all about what's happening within our world of research and practice, voluntary sector research. So do have a look at the discussion list if you want to as well. All the details are on our website. I'm sure John will be putting something in the chat function now, because I can't see that at the moment, to give you the link to the VSM website. But also I just wanted to highlight to you the journal. So the Voluntary Sector Review Journal, which is the journal of VSSN in association with, produced by Policy Press. It is one of the member benefits. So if you become a member of VSSN, you get copies of Voluntary Sector Review for free, well, as part of your kind of membership. Some excellent articles in there. The ongoing kind of research pieces, but also policy and practice sections. Both John and Ali are involved in the production of the journal. And yesterday, if you missed it, there was a session from the editors, which you can watch again when we make the recordings available. But in that, the editors announced that we're having a new section introduced into the journal, which will be research notes, and they'll be focused on kind of short pieces of research that has come out kind of on COVID and responses to COVID. So do look out for that in the next couple of editions, and there'll be much shorter pieces and much kind of quicker turnaround in terms of some of the reviewing. So please do have a look at that. Think about submitting, think about subscribing, think about reading. It's a great read, and some of the pieces are kind of made available free online, so do have a look out for that. So that's all kind of I wanted to say by way of a general introduction, before we then move on to the main purpose of this afternoon. And before I do that, I just mentioned that Veronique is going to come in at the end of the session and just say a word or two from NCVO. So we're topping and tailing with the partners for organising the conference. So we'll come to Veronique at the end of the session. But now I wanted to turn to John and to Ali to launch their two new books. I think that for me, John and Ali kind of really represent what VSSN is all about. It's the best bits of VSSN which are captured within John and Ali, I think. Both, I think, I'm right in saying, started off within the kind of new researchers part of VSSN, engaging in some of those sessions when they were doing their PhDs. And since then, we've really kind of seen them both flourish as kind of established academics in the field, really making a contribution to our thinking and understanding of voluntary sector and volunteering. John now within the sociology department at Sheffield Hallam University, Ali within the Centre for Philanthropy at Kent. So both becoming kind of well-established academics in their own right, writing intelligently, critically and engagingly on voluntary sector issues. But at the same time, both have continued to kind of contribute heavily to the network. So both John and Ali are involved in the VSSN steering group, kind of contributing to the network as a whole. As I said just now, both are also involved in the journal. So really how the kind of research community kind of works together and how you kind of contribute to that is absolutely fantastic. But importantly, I think for me that both of you have also kind of continued to be engaged in the world of policy and practice. I know Ali in particular has a background in working in the voluntary sector and kind of continues to be engaged, but John also kind of really being committed to ensuring that research is not just kind of academically rigorous and intellectually stimulating, but also practically useful. So again, kind of all points which I think are great about you both. So that's about them generally. Their books in particular, I recommend you reading both their books. I have them here. So John Dean's book, The Good Glow, Charity and the Symbolic Power of Doing Good, and Alison Body's book, Children's Charities in Crisis, Early Interventions in the State. I'm not going to tell you too much about them because John and Ali are going to tell us all about them. But in very brief, Ali's book very much explores the world of children's charities, and in particular the landscape of early interventions. And I think really the kind of constantly shifting and contested boundaries between statutory and voluntary provision. We were talking earlier about how the title was Children's Charities in Crisis, and this was pre-COVID. So how it would be interesting if Ali kind of reflects on what's kind of happening now when we're in the kind of health crisis to add to the existing crisis there. John's book it has a very different focuses on the symbolic power of charity, particularly in terms of the kind of personal benefits that can kind of accrue and the power that you kind of gain through volunteering and giving. Both challenge us to think in new ways, both challenge us to think critically about voluntary action, which I think is really important. So I'd encourage you all to kind of go away and buy the books and read the books. I think John will probably have already put up in the chat, and if not, we will do that. There is a 30% discount that you can have from Policy Press for attending the conference if you want to buy their books at the moment. So do have a look at that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over. First, we're going to hear from Ali, and then we're going to hear from John. As with previous sessions, please do chat amongst yourselves, as I can see you're already doing on the chat function. Send questions to the Q&A function. What we might have a look at doing is at the end of the session kind of making everyone who's here present kind of panelists, so we can all be visible on the screen and make it a bit more informal, so we can have a bit more of an open discussion. But and do kind of grab a drink as we go through it. But as I say, I'm going to turn now to Ali, and then we'll kind of review how we'll handle the rest of the session when we've heard from Ali and John. So Ali, over to you. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll just try and share my screen. Okay, can you all see that? Yep. Brilliant, that's working. Okay, that's a good start. Brilliant, thank you, and thank you so much for the really kind words, Angela. And as Angela said, I very much feel like as an academic I've grown up through this conference and through VSSN. It was the first conference I ever attended as an academic, and continue to come each year, and really grateful for all the efforts that the whole VSSN team have gone to for putting this conference online this year. So, briefly giving you an introduction to my book then. Following a decade of radical change in policy and funding in children's early intervention services, and with the role of the third sector under increased scrutiny, in this book I seek to assess the shifting interplay between state provision and voluntary organisations delivering early intervention services for children, young people and their families. So the book draws on 100 voices from the front line, including 80 individuals who are working in senior positions and on the front line in children's charities, delivering such services, and also 20 commissioners of children's services, as well as voices from schools and education. The overall aim here was to present a really vivid account of the lived experiences of charitable groups working with some of the most vulnerable children, and offer some insights into the impact of recent social policy decisions on their work. And as Angela said, having formerly held multiple senior positions in children's charities, as well as being a former commissioner of children's early intervention myself, I hope that by telling these stories of how this landscape has changed over the decade and the impact of those changes, I can highlight some important lessons for future policy while demonstrating the immeasurable value of voluntary sector organisations working in this challenging terrain. So, as Angela rightly pointed out, pulling on the word crisis, crisis is a really strong word. So I just wanted to focus on that for a moment. When this book was published, it was in April, it was in mid-lockdown, and I had wondered at that point if using the word crisis in the title was a bit premature, because quite frankly, if children's charities were operating in a time of crisis pre-COVID, I wasn't quite sure what words I could then use to describe the potential impact of a global pandemic on them. But I also wanted to give some reasoning behind why I used the word crisis and why I'm really glad that I stuck with that title. So in total, I did 100 interviews that formally informed the book, as well as lots of other informal conversations. And in those formal interviews, the word crisis was used 393 times. However, it was used in a variety of different contexts. For example, it was used as early intervention policy and services being described as in crisis, vulnerable children and families not being adequately supported and being described as being in crisis, organisations facing funding cuts and so describing themselves as in a state of crisis. and a crisis of confidence in the policy and direction of travel. So as I hope I articulate in this book, and I've argued in a few press pieces since in the Independent and Transforming Society, many children's charities were already operating in modes of crisis response pre-COVID, and COVID-19, in my opinion, has simply amplified the state of crisis for many of these organisations. So this book is divided into 4 sections. Section 1, or part 1, covers chapters 1 and 2, and it focuses primarily on social policy and how the discourse of third sector and early intervention has evolved over recent successive governments, particularly exploring Labour into the Conservatives. And it highlights the progressive societal hardening in focus as preventative services have become increasingly targeted and increasingly punitive. Part 2 covers chapters 3 and 4, and this particularly discusses those who are on the front line of early intervention, so including charities and including schools. And it discusses the types of services that are being provided by children's charities and increasingly by schools. So part 3 covers chapters 5 to 7, and I'd say this is kind of the core argument of the book. And this particularly focuses on children's charities' experiences of those shifting landscapes and what this means for both the voluntary sector overall and the field of preventative services. So this part of the book particularly focuses on commissioning relationships, drawing on the perspectives of leaders and practitioners working within the field of early intervention, and also upon the commissioners' experiences of commissioning themselves. And part 4, the conclusion, here I really hope to kind of wrap the whole book together and suggest some really positive steps in moving forwards, drawing on notions of collaborative commissioning and the pooling of resources as a potential step in the right direction. So in this book, I examine the commissioning of early intervention support over the past decade and the role of children's charities, schools and states in protecting some of our most vulnerable children in society. I argue that children's early intervention is facing crisis. While the state retains statutory responsibility for children's social care, increased responsibility is being placed on schools and children's charities and services to stop children moving up the thresholds of intervention and into care. However, the financial and infrastructure support for schools, charities and services to achieve this has significantly diminished over the past decade. And again, this has just been exacerbated further by the pandemic, which is simultaneously threatening charities' income and the ability to provide services, whilst increasing pressure on the demand for services and support for vulnerable children and families. Nonetheless, increasing demand for early intervention services, driven by also rising poverty levels and a growing inequality gap, has resulted in greater demands on charities to support some of our country's most vulnerable children. When we talk to those who are on the ground, and certainly through the interviews that I carried out, many charities and children's preventative service providers feel that they're increasingly reducing the scope of their services, arguing that reduced forms of funding and commissioned contracts are forcing them to deliver overly prescriptive, narrowly targeted, short-term provision, often with burdensome and what they perceive as meaningless monitoring requirements that are often perceived to not meet the needs of their community. However, when you talk to commissioners, they highlight issues of bureaucratic procurement rules, ever reducing resources and increasing defensive charitable sector, diminishing their ability to respond effectively to children's needs. And in the midst of all that, schools highlight significant reductions in the availability of early help and community services, placing an increased pressure on them to support children, while they too experience funding cuts and increased performance pressures. And whilst there may be lots of disagreement between state, school and charity actors in this about where the fault for some of this lies, one thing was really clear that came consistently across all interviews was that all are seemingly in agreement that things cannot stay as they are. So in exploring the complexity of the commissioning relationship, I argue in this book, and along with others who are making some similar discussions at the moment, that commissioning itself is not the problem per se. Rather, it's how that commissioning plays out which creates the tension, and more collaborative commissioning approaches are possible. So in this book, I highlight the discretion, social skills and tactics that have been used by both commissioners and charities who often seek to reshape or indeed successfully bypass traditional rule-bound commissioning processes. For example, some tactics adopted by charities include engaging with wide networks of supporters and using informal relationships with state actors to bypass commissioning processes, whilst commissioners often use their own personal and professional discretion to seek more, to make more providers more visible, to engage formally and informally with others, and to try to buffer providers from more bureaucratic monitoring requirements as much as they possibly can. When we consider COVID-19, coupled with the existing pressures now on children's preventative services that are outlined in this book, it provides the urgent action imperative to develop innovative commissioning, collaborative commissioning responses, which step outside of the traditional and policy rule-bound restrictions. So within my own research, I came across several examples, which I draw upon in this book, where commissioners, charities, schools, communities sought to collaboratively work in partnership to pull together to meet local need. However, overall, in terms of all the commissioning processes that I looked at and I used to inform this book, these were quite rare and often in spite of regulatory commissioning processes rather than because of them, with commissioners bending the rules to facilitate collaboration. So continued and potential further reductions that we're now going to see in local authority spending will only constrain its capacity for collaborative commissioning further. So in the conclusion of this book, I try and argue that we need a system reform. We need to move away from competitive tendering of children's services and instead embrace deeper and meaningful collaborative partnerships between local authorities, charities, philanthropies, schools and communities. And we need to have an increased recognition for the importance of early intervention services in helping prevent children and families moving up the thresholds of care. And of course, this all needs to be underpinned by urgent, sustainable investment from government in preventative services, which are easily and freely accessible for all vulnerable families. So the final edits of this book went in December 2019, 3 days after the general election. Given I'd just written a book about the impact of a decade of a Conservative-led government on children's services, I have to say the last chapter and those last edits was actually quite a tough write, as I tried to kind of chart a positive way forwards that would really support vulnerable children. But I returned in that I had a conversation with one of my interviewees in those last few days, and they gave me this quote, which I think sums it all up quite well. And I'd ask you to read it. I'm not going to read it out for you, but it really does talk about that need for civil society and to come together, to collaborate with local authorities, but also to be holding government to account. As my book title implies, the evidence suggests that many children's charities delivering these frontline preventative services perceive themselves, the services they deliver, and the children they support to be in crisis. And the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated these issues. And many feel now without that urgent investment and support, this will only deepen, leaving many vulnerable children and families without suitable support. So my hope from this book is to spark debate amongst academics, amongst policy professionals and practitioners alike about how we may collaboratively come together to address these challenges, both now and for the future. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ali. That's an excellent kind of overview and really interesting to reflect on some of the conversations we've been having over the last few days in terms of collaboration and how potentially there's been more kind of collaboration during kind of COVID. So I wonder if you would be able to see some of those kind of shifts if you went into the field now, if you spoke to some of your respondents, or if there would still be that kind of very varied kind of picture, I guess, that maybe was there then. Thank you. I'm sure lots of people have got lots of questions. I know I have things that I'd want to ask you, but let's hold on to those until we've heard from John, and then we'll come back to both of you, if that's okay. Brilliant. So John, over to you. Thank you.
Can you all see that? Yeah, great. So as Angela said, Policy Press have offered a 30% discount if you order either of our books between the 8th and the 11th of September. There is a cheat though to this, which is if you sign up for the Bristol University Press Policy Press mailing list, they'll actually give you 35% off the book. So actually that's a much better way to stay on top. And actually, I think both me and Ali would say that Policy Press have been very good throughout this entire process. And I don't think voluntary sector research in the UK would be at the same level were it not for a publisher like Policy Press, that is a not-for-profit, that publishes a lot of work in this sector, and a lot of people in this meeting will have worked through Policy Press and indeed through VS, and they publish voluntary sector review. So they've been excellent to work with. And I'm just also going to offer my thanks to VSSN. I did start in the new researchers session probably a decade ago as I was starting my doctoral work, and it was always just a very welcoming, very normal environment. You hear horror stories of academic conferences, and some of the big American ones can be quite unwelcoming at times, let's say, and VSSN is the complete opposite. It's nice to be around normal people who tolerate my nonsense quite a lot. That's quite good. So I published a book called The Good Glow, Charity and the Symbolic Power of Doing Good. And this comes from something that I've been thinking about for a while as someone who considered themselves a Bourdieusian sociologist, i.e. using the work of Pierre Bourdieu. And neither Bourdieu nor sociology have a great recent track record of dealing with issues of charity. Charity is weirdly a subject that sociology often doesn't get that close to, leaving it often to organizational studies or social policy. And so I sort of wanted to write a book that threw a lot of social theory and sociological ideas at the issue of modern charity and how it currently works, in my view, and investigate in various ways. So the main thing is focused on this idea of the good glow. That's borrowing very cynically from James Andreoni, who wrote about the warm glow in the late 80s, early 90s, which is the economist's idea that, well, charity must have something else. Charity is irrational. Giving your money away is slightly irrational, so why do people do it? Maybe they get something out of it. Maybe they feel good about themselves. And that's a perfectly legitimate and reasonable thing. You give some money to charity, you do some voluntary work, you feel good about yourself for giving back. But charity also makes you look good. There's a reason why we are more attracted to charitable, nice, kind, generous people in our lives and generally shy away from the ungenerous. Charity, in my view, puts a certain halo on your head or a certain glow around you. It has a certain sense of improving your reputation because you have done something good for other people. And I wanted to explore this element, whether that was true and how it worked in various different ways. I'll give you this example, and I'm sorry, as usual, as with so much these days, we have to focus on the 45th American president, Donald Trump. Here he is in the mid-90s at a charitable event for the Association to Benefit Children, a New York charity that had just built a new orphanage for children with AIDS in New York City. It's a big gala. As you can see, Rudolph Giuliani, the then mayor of New York, was there alongside Donald Trump. There are a lot of dignitaries in the room, including Stephen Fisher, who was a wealthy donor who had just given the majority of the money to build this new orphanage. What happened was that Donald Trump just showed up. No one had invited him. He'd never given a penny to the cause. He just walked through the crowd and walked onto the stage and took the seat that had been reserved for Stephen Fisher, the man who'd actually donated the money. "What should we do?" said one person from the charity. "Oh, just sing past it." So they warbled into the first song on the programme, "This Little Light of Mine," alongside Trump and a chorus of children with a photographer snapping photos, and Trump looking for all the world like an honoured donor to the cause. Afterwards, two charity workers said he left without offering an explanation or a donation. The actual donor who had built the nursery, Stephen Fisher, was stuck in the audience. The charity spent months trying to repair their relationship with him. You can say a lot about Donald Trump, and I have, but he understood what I call the symbolic power of charity. He understood that actually just being seen to be associated with a good cause, to be on a dais, receiving the warm acclamation and looking like a generous giver, may actually be more important for his reputation, for his business connections, for his place in the higher echelons of New York society, than actually giving the money. And if you look throughout Trump's career, he has regularly made huge promises of donations to numerous organizations and then not followed through. It's a reason why the New York Attorney General has shut down his charitable foundation and banned his children from leading charities. Between 2011 and 2015, he claimed he had given over $102 million to charity, but none of that actually came from his own pocket. It was made of donated rounds of golf or rides on his plane or donations from his foundation, to which he hadn't actually given any of his money for 5 years previously. Trump understands, I think, that being seen to be charitable can be more beneficial to you than actually being charitable. And we see a lot in a lot of the critiques of wealthy giving and high-level philanthropy from people like Lindsay McGooey or Anand Giridharadas, that the wealthy are often giving money in order to keep things the same. We live at a time of intense inequality. As we know, billionaire incomes have gone up massively during the pandemic, and giving away $1 million here or $1 billion there actually doesn't make a lot of difference. The good headlines you get is not enough to cover up the damage your inequality and wealth hoarding is doing. Closer to home, you have it in messages like this. And I took this photo in a cancer research shop on Ecclesall Road in Sheffield, and it's a bag that you could buy for £1 to take your goods away in, which says, "I shop at Cancer Research UK, I save lives." You carry your goods away, people go, yeah, that's a good person. They've been to a charity shop. That's a good recognition of someone doing good. Yeah, I think well of that person. I always wonder what's written underneath it, though. What comes next? If you don't shop at Cancer Research UK, you don't save lives? Screw you? Is that what comes next? Because charity can be, unfortunately, as we'll come to, weaponized in certain ways, there seems to be this power behind it. It retains a symbolic resonance that allows people to use it for slightly uncomfortable ends. I like this cartoon from the Times back in 2016 after the children's charity, which relates back to Ali's work, Kids Company, declined in over the summer. And the charity that would once been such a big part of the charity scene, and Camilla Batman-Gellish was incredibly well known, fell apart very quickly. There's an argument that her charisma, her inspiration as a great leader of people, and the fact that we see charities as different and distinct from other sectors of the economy because it's not for profit and it's trying to help people, means that charities sometimes get away with things. They can get away with bad accounting. They can get away with not tracking their impacts. They can get away with not upholding good safeguarding standards. And in Kids Company, we saw those things come together. And so the very essence of charitable organizations are, to a certain extent, surrounded by this good glow that means that we don't question them perhaps in the same way that we might question a private business. Now, that certainly, I think, is declining with a Conservative government for 10 years that really thinks New Labour stacked the deck of the charity sector. We can see that actually that belief of charities has gone away. As I think Kate Britton said, charities are no longer heroes by default in the eyes of policymakers. And I think Kids Company were no longer able to use their symbolic resources. And my final example is maybe a bit more controversial, but is around the poppy. And I first presented this research back in 2016 at the VSSN conference in the VSVR conference in Leeds. And I talked about the symbolic power of the poppy as a symbol, both of fundraising, which has raised billions of pounds, but also as a symbol of remembrance. And some of you, I think, in the chat in attendance today were in that session. The poppy is a fascinating symbol, and a lot of you may be aware of the increased antagonism that surrounds it every year called poppy fascism. The idea that public figures who are not wearing a poppy are instantly castigated. As Dame Barbara Windsor, when interviewed on Sky News, once said, "Babs, what would you say to all those who don't want to wear a poppy?" She replies, "Well, they can sod off for all I care." And this idea that the poppy has become something that you almost have to do is well debated every single year and leads to a lot of part of what we might call the wider culture war that's going on. And what I look at this symbol is a weaponization of a charity symbol in order to serve different ends. Britain at the moment, with all manner of structural issues that are going on to do with structural racism and Black Lives Matter and inequality and Brexit, and our sort of concept of self is very much represented in this symbol that the British Legion say you don't have to wear. We do it because it's about fundraising and remembrance every year. As the cultural theorist Paul Gilroy says, the memory of World War II has been stretched so thin that it cannot possibly accomplish all the important cultural work it is increasingly relied upon to do. A generation for whom knowledge of that conflict arrives on a daily loop via Hollywood are nonetheless required to use a cheaply manufactured surrogate memory of it as a favoured means to find and restore their ebbing sense of what it means to be English. This charity symbol has been elevated because it's surrounded by so much goodness, so much symbolic quality, that it actually ends up being weaponized by those people who claim to love it the most. In the book, I do various focus groups and interviews with charity sector leaders, and I remember one charity sector leader who said, if I'm going to a meeting and I'm not wearing a poppy, I'd rather be late to the meeting and go and find a poppy seller and pin one on, because the risk of me prejudicing my income from a potential donor is too great otherwise. And I think that says something really interesting about the way in which this charity symbol works, although I do recognize it's a different charity symbol to many other wristbands and issues. So that's a very quick introduction of what the book's about. There's lots of theory in it, there's lots of data in it, there's a couple of jokes about penises, but that's just for the hell of it, really. And if you're interested, and if you think, oh, I don't really want to spend academic book amounts of money on it, there's a couple of other things that I've done there, a couple of links to blogs and an interview I did with Rod Davis on the CAF Giving Thought podcast. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, John. Another fantastic kind of overview of the issues that your books covers. And what I think is great about both your books is how they integrate the kind of theory, but also the kind of the empirical evidence as well, so fantastically. So thank you both very much. What we're going to attempt to do now is to make everyone, there's kind of almost 40 of you kind of in attendance. We're going to try and promote you all to be panelists, therefore we can all be seen on the screen. You can all have the kind of the power, if you like, to ask questions directly of the speakers and to be visible if you choose to be so, be audible if you choose to be so. So while I do that, I'm just going to ask Veronique quickly to see if there's any questions on the question and answer function. So do put them in there while I'm just kind of sorting this bit of technology out. So just give me a minute and I'll try and make you all panelists, as I say, but in the meantime, do put questions in the question and answer function. And we will
for the moment, we don't have any questions in the function.
We do have one question, Veronique, in the chat function, but it's Angela. Is that a Corona beer? Which would have been very on brand, but no.
It's a soul.
I was focusing on the Q&A.
I probably shouldn't be drinking at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
But some very nice comments in the chat function. Some really nice comments that are worth reading as well.
Yeah.
I can see people appearing.
Slowly but surely. And if you look in the chat, Shannon Neese from Policy Press has said that if you are interested in submitting a book proposal to them, do get in touch with her or Laura Vickers, and they focus on sociology or voluntary sector and social policy respectively. And I hopefully speak for me and Ali when I just say they're very easy to work with and would very much encourage it.
Yeah, I would just like to echo that, John. Really flexible, really easy to work with.
The other thing I'd say is I'm not sure about the optics of pouring myself more Prosecco while you were talking about children charities funding in crisis, but so be it.
We said it was going to be an informal session, so
we did.
Those of you who are joining, please do feel free to unmute yourself to make yourself visible, but equally don't feel obliged to do so. If you do have a question, either put it through the Q&A function or kind of raise your hand, or kind of, if you want to, shout out, and we'll see how it works out.
Or if you just want to say hello.
John, I'm about halfway through your book and I'm very much enjoying it.
Thank you.
And I need to keep reading because I haven't quite got into the depths of the poppy yet. And I don't know whether you've looked at the international sort of factors behind the poppy. So, as there's no other questions,
No, go for it.
What about the fact that it's an accepted symbol or a symbol that's used in other Commonwealth countries?
So because it's a data focused chapter, and I was talking to the leaders of charities in England and London, so I don't focus that much on the different interpretations of it and different uses of it around the world. But I do think reading the history of the poppy and how it came about is quite fascinating, because it was an American university professor and a French YWCA member who took it first to the leaders of the British military and New Zealand and Canada and France and America. So it actually has roots outside of the UK. And actually, if you see the fact that it's become such an embedded symbol of far-right nationalism, and you see it attached to all sorts of EDL flags and Britain First flags, we know that generally those people have no sense of history, but actually if you start unpicking where these symbols come from and what was trying to be achieved in the first place, I think actually people, well, they try to ignore it, but it's a fascinating thing when you start pulling at those threads and pointing out the realities of these things. Yeah. The same as we saw last week with Elgar's comments about the fact that he actually didn't like Land of Hope and Glory very much after he'd written it because of how it was misused.
Yep.
Thank you. Does anyone want to come in then? I'll try and kind of keep an eye across the kind of two screens in which you're visible. So do stick your hand up, or as Carolyn did then, just if we're quiet for a moment, just do feel free to speak up. I should remind everyone that we are recording, so just if you want to be aware of that. I probably should have said with my mention of Sol that there are, of course, other beers available.
There is a question from Emma Taylor-Collins in the chat function to John.
Emma, do you want to ask your question directly? You can unmute yourself.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Ali and John. It was really good to hear about your books, and they are next on my list to read, so that might be what I'm doing tonight. You've inspired me to get started. John, I was wondering if there's anything you can say about the kind of voluntary or mutual aid that we've seen in the response to the pandemic, that and whether your ideas about the Good Glow kind of resonate with anything we've seen there.
Yeah, so I'd finished writing it before this started, but one thing that immediately as the pandemic hit and we realized we were going into lockdown, someone on my street in Sheffield started the very local, hyper-local street WhatsApp group that was about mutual aid, that was about sharing, that was about all of those sort of things. And I very quickly became aware of how you are presenting yourself in those sort of spaces, how you respond to people, how there was I'm not very much a joiner inner. My personality is more as someone who sort of takes a step back and isn't great at those sort of social interactions. But there was, to a certain extent, a performative element to when someone said, oh, I've just done this, everyone had to say thank you. Everyone on the streets had to say, yes, thank you very much, you're great, brilliant. Then everyone would say, oh, this is a really nice street to live on, and everyone would have to couple in and say these things. There's a chapter in the book about social media and how young people are experiencing charity on social media, and how they worry that charity is again being misused and used as a way to present themselves on Facebook in certain different lights. Like they've all got the friend who puts up a status like, oh, I'm so tired after my night at the homeless shelter last night. Oh, but good on me anyway. And that sort of humble brag where you're sort of boasting and sort of moaning at the same time has just become this standard bit of online discourse. And so the thing that I was experiencing in that WhatsApp group, how everyone sort of had to show how thankful they were for someone doing what was often just a standard piece of neighborliness that before we couldn't see. We all on that street were sharing things and talking to each other beforehand, but suddenly because we could see all the sharing, we all had to comment on the sharing. And I think that's an experience that other people I've spoken to felt a little bit, that there was a performative element. The biggest place where that obviously came in, and me and Ali have talked about this, is the clapping on a Thursday, and how if you don't clap, you're somehow unkind and ungenerous, and how then that got wrapped up in a political narrative about, well, all the nurses at the weekend going and spending their claps at the supermarket rather than their pay rise, for instance. So that's I think where the analysis goes.
That's John's thing there, saying that John and I had this discussion because I was one of those families who got a note through my door because on one Thursday night we didn't go and clap. My children went to bed really early. And so actually, and John and I had a really interesting conversation about the kind of, not just being seen to, but also the impact of when you're seen not to participate in those spaces.
Interesting questions about what people make visible and what people keep private as well. And I think, Emma, some of your research shows that there's things that people will talk about and things that they'll kind of be doing, but they won't talk about. And it's kind of a very considered thing in terms of what they think is valorized and what's not. And I guess that shifts over time. Are there other questions or reflections? Nick?
And mute myself. I was going to ask John whether he investigated the phenomenon of the anonymous donor at all. How big a thing it is. Are those people, you could say the people who are the opposite of Trump, the people who give a lot of money but hide away at the same time and don't publicize themselves as having given a lot of money, rather than Trump, who gave nothing and publicized himself as giving. It's an interesting question in my mind, because there have been some notable recent examples of this, and I wonder whether he factors this into his analysis, whether he actually, one of the things about anonymous people, you just don't know who they are. But it's a difficult research subject. But I just wonder whether he actually explored that issue at all, as a response to this pervasive sense of curating your identity online, which you just sort of talked about. Or more broadly, curating your identity as a generally speaking, a good and worthy citizen in some way or other. I suppose there are people who don't need that, but I just wonder whether, in fact, it features at all in your analysis, or whether it informs it at all.
There are discussions of the role of anonymity that come in and out throughout the book, but as you say, it is quite a hard thing to analyse because we can't always stay attached to it. There is this idea that the anonymous donor, therefore, is the purest of all, because they're not seeking, while they still get the warm glow, they are not actually seeking any good glow in any sense. They're not seeking that wider social reputation management. There's an interesting, for those of you who want to go onto YouTube, there's a famous clip from Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David has donated money to an art gallery, and he gets the sign that says "Wing donated by Larry David," and on the other side of the hall is something that says "Wing donated by Anonymous," and someone has given money anonymously, and he's sort of like, well, now it looks like I did mine for the credit. This anonymous donor is putting us all to shame. But actually it turns out the anonymous donor is Ted Danson, and he's told everybody that he has given the money. So he both gets the symbolic credit of choosing to be anonymous, and everyone gets to know it was him at the same time. I think there's a very interesting case study to be written about someone like George Michael, who after he died, it came out that actually he'd been supporting cause after cause after cause for years and had very rarely talked about it, and was literally sending envelopes of money to random people who he found out were in need. And how we sort of uber celebrate that level of giving, but there is no social reputational benefit to it. Yeah, so anonymity is spread throughout the book in various different ways, and how the literature has dealt with that.
Thank you. Other questions, comments, reflections? I can see there's a question from Beth on the chat function. Beth, do you want to?
Hi.
Oh, hi.
It's such a lovely end to the conference. Thank you, Ali and John. It's all very good. And yeah, I just thought I'd chip in and ask John. I mean, your example you began with is brilliant. The Trump story. I don't know where you dug it up from, but it's genius. Well done. But is it typical? is my question really. How widespread is that kind of discrepancy? How widespread could it be? And does it tell us more about Trump than about charity? Gift theorists, from Marcel Mauss onwards, would say that you can't help but get something back. Even if you resist having your name on the building, you still get a warm glow inside, hence Andrea's phrase. It's just integral to the gift. So, research shows that when you make a donation, you benefit and society benefits. It's a win-win. So how do you square that with your good glow analysis?
So the first thing is to say, yes, I'm a cynic by nature, and so therefore I obviously focus on the negative. But I also the Trump example is my best way of explaining what I'm talking about. I think that's what it's so extraordinary, and so many people can understand what's going on. That's my link in to explain what I'm talking about to people. But then you go into the more everyday, more normal, more common experiences, like the social media showing off, like the poppy, and that's where the theory links to. Most charitable giving is absolutely genuine. The vast majority, the overwhelming majority, is absolutely genuine. And I do conclude in the book that the good glow is a good thing. It is. I want to live in a world where more people do more stuff for charity. Being good is good. And I want to hang around with people who are nice and kind and do things for others. I don't want to, and so therefore them getting a little bit of reputational benefit from that is perfectly fine. It's at the edges, and I think sociology is often a discipline that finds itself at the cynical edge, that it's trying to say where this has gone wrong, where this has malfunctioned, where this equation of someone putting something in and getting something reasonable back has started to misfire. And when that sort of Mauss reciprocity sort of goes wrong. And Mauss said that the gift is like a bite. It has the power to sever, because actually the amount of the weight it can put onto the recipient can be too strong for the recipient to bear. So that exploring that sort of problematic side of gifts, I think, is the fun bit, is the other thing as well. I mean, I'm always going to focus on the thing with the fun examples rather than the unfun, even though that probably skews my analysis somewhat. I think I'm not as cynical about big giving as the Bergmans, Girodoradis's, Magui's of the world, but I lean that way. That's the.
Thank you. More comments, questions, particularly if anyone's got questions or comments for Ali, would be fantastic.
I have.
Oh, hi, Alex. Yeah, please do.
Hi, how are you
Good,
all? Just an interesting question, that children's charities, like cancer charities, tend to be, favoured objects of donation. My favourite charity, which is suffering at the moment, it's an animal charity. You've never heard of it. It's the British Herpetological Association, which is for snakes. And they don't get many donations. Who donates to snakes? But the question for Ali is that children's charities, it's quite an easy ask. Hang on, I think we've lost sound, haven't we?
No, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Yeah, but it's like soft furry animals, which my mother always donated to. But the children's charities, and I don't claim to be an expert in philanthropy like Beth, but children's charities generally don't seem to have much of a problem getting money, because children are a popular donation, or am I wrong?
So I would disagree with you slightly there. So I do think overall, yes, the idea of children is a popular cause area. But when you start breaking that down, I think actually you start seeing some real differences. So I think, yes, children cancer charities are likely to be, maybe people are warmer to, and maybe it's an easier ask. Yeah. But children's charities, I was looking particularly at early intervention charities. So they were dealing with they were dealing with families where maybe there was substance misuse, there was mental health problems, there were behavioural difficulties with the families. And actually research that Beth and I did a couple of years ago showed how actually those charities that are focusing on that other side, the families, and actually the issues were a much tougher ask. So even though some of these organisations, yes, did turn to philanthropy, actually for their sustainable services and service provision, they relied on the relationship with the state. Now, in the book, I do go into it more. That's obviously built up over many, many years of having those relationships with the state and the state becoming reliant on the charities. And I am critical of some of those, or not critical, I have some criticisms of those charities, of that relationship when that's become so close that the charity is completely reliant on the state. But what we didn't see was the ability where philanthropy could just simply step in if commissioned services stopped. So what we have seen is a massive reduction in the services that are delivered by early help and in early intervention. So particularly for those children experiencing problems at home.
I mean, if I can offer, Geraldine Peacock was the person on my appointment panel when I was appointed as professor, and she was chief exec of Guide Dogs. And she said, people give for the dog, not for the blind. Yeah. And, you know, and my comment maybe is, people give for the child, not for the drug addicted parent.
Yeah, I certainly think some of that's true. Certainly in these organisations, they didn't find philanthropy stepping in as in terms of, and part of that is also about how they were asking and whether they were asking. That's what I mean. There's a lot of kind of nuances behind that. It's certainly not a simple answer to that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you both. We've got one more question from Silke Roth, and then we'll just take that, and then I'm afraid we'll then have to move for a final couple of words from Veronique. So Silke, do you want to ask your question?
Okay, it's more a comment than a question. So I immensely enjoyed all of the papers and this final session, and learned a lot. And I thought that it would perhaps be very useful to look also more at international volunteering. We have had the paper by Bianca Fadel and Matt Bailey-Smith, and I think a lot of the points that John is also raising in his book, which I enjoyed immensely, can be found in the context of development studies and humanitarianism. And I think both sides benefit from these sociological and other perspectives, because it is so hard to critically engage with doing good, like for instance also Monika Krause in the Good Project, by on the one hand acknowledging all the hard work that is done, and on the other hand seeing the paradoxes and inequalities that are perpetuated. And so this is just encouraging to look also there. And on the other hand, thanks for the great conference.
Thank you very much. I would definitely kind of echo that. I think there's so much in the international development literature, the discussions about power and inequalities are so much more direct, and I think we often tend to kind of skirt around those issues, particularly in volunteering.
And in the book in chapter 1, there is a big deep dive on Monika Krause's work. So
yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over now. So thank you both very much to John and to Ali, and thank you to everyone who has kind of contributed. It's been great that you've all been able to join us in this last session in this way. It's so nice to kind of see everyone as well as to kind of hear and to see the questions typed. So final word from Veronique.
Hi everybody. As Beth said, it's a great way, I think, to finish the conference. Thank you, John and Ali. That was really great. I think it's an idea for future research conferences in future years. I really enjoyed this year's conference. I thought it was very full, very packed, but full of interesting contents. I mean, for me, on a personal level, because it's a little bit more relaxed with this book launch, and on a personal level, the research conference has been important to me. I've been at NCVO for a good many years, and I've learned a lot through listening to research presentations at the research conference. And what I've noticed throughout the years is that there are more and more researchers thinking about what research means for practice and policy. And I can only encourage people to do that even more. And I think maybe in the current context of COVID, people have seen how important it is to be able to do that. And so I really, really encourage people to do more of that. And I think it also explains why NCVO has wanted to be part of this conference and has been part of this conference for so long, because we believe that research can help people on the ground and policymakers. I also wanted to obviously thank the speakers and the delegates for fantastic presentations and fantastic discussion points, but I wanted to thank our partners. So really great to work with a local partner, again something new and that we should do more of. So thank you to BVSC, specifically Sophie Wilson, but a big thank you to VSSN. I have been blown away actually by VSSN, because last year they became the lead partner for the research conference, and it was the first time that they did so much for the research conference, and it did so well. And then COVID hit and we weren't quite sure what was going to happen in terms of the research conference. We did talk about cancelling, but no, VSSN really pushed for an online solution, and they've done such an amazing job. I can only you know, thank them. And yeah, I think quite inspiring really. So well done to everybody, and thank you all for being here, and we hope to see you next year. It will probably be face to face, but who knows? No, I'm hoping very much that it will be face to face. And as I was saying to Angela, it is not easy to finish an online event. So I'm not quite sure what to say next, but I wish you well. And thank you for coming to the conference, and we hope to see you next year one way or another.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.